بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وقني شر نفسي وفلت لساني وأن أضل أؤذل بغير حق رب العالمين وبعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First of all, I want to thank MCC and all of those responsible for affording this opportunity to come here and spend some time with you and hopefully gain the benefit of both your intellectual and your spiritual capital. Inshallah, I hope that I and Sheikh Ubayd will leave here just as edified as I hope that many of you will leave here. The title of this weekend's gathering is Building Consensus and Unity in an Age of Polarity. I think the first thing that we want to start off by noting is that consensus and unity are not the same. And that if we have consensus, by definition, we have unity. But we can have unity without consensus. That is to say, consensus and unity are not the same thing. And so when we start talking about building consensus and unity, we need to be careful in understanding what it is that we're trying to build. We can have unity even if we don't necessarily have consensus. And oftentimes, our tendency to confuse or conflate these two ends up leading us to forfeiting both. That is to say, because we don't have consensus, we feel we don't have unity. And what we strive to have is consensus, whereas in many instances, what we should be striving for is unity. And oftentimes, our attempts to sort of forge or force consensus undermines our ability to remain united, to realize any unity. I think it's very important that we understand the difference between these two. Because one of the things that we're going to be talking about a lot over the weekend is our status as a collective. And our status as a collective is as an ummah. And we are a global ummah. And the idea that a global ummah would be in consensus, even on most of the individual issues that it confronts, all right, is a chimera at least. It's something of a pipe dream at least. But of course, the big issue is, what is it that we need to have consensus on? What is it that we want consensus on? And why? What is it that we have to have unity on? And why? Again, remember the difference between consensus and unity, which I'll talk about in a little more detail in a minute. But what is it that we want consensus on? What is that we need to maintain consensus on? And what is it that we want unity on? Can our unity survive a lack of consensus on issues that we ourselves identify as not requiring consensus? And I know a lot of us sitting here listening to this, I mean, this makes eminent sense. But as we engage each other in the face of the issues that confront us, oftentimes this distinction is lost. And it undermines our unity. And oftentimes that lack of unity can lead to a sort of internal bleeding, where we come into the same room, we're all Muslims, we're trying to negotiate our issues, but the internal bleeding that has been inflicted by our mistaking the lack of consensus for the lack of unity impedes our ability to negotiate our issues. All of this raises the fundamental question: what is unity? What is unity? We know consensus is unanimous agreement. Consensus is where everybody who's involved in the deliberation of an issue agrees on a particular course of action, or a particular definition, or a particular perception. It is unanimous agreement on an issue. But what is unity? Unity is what we'll be talking about a lot over this weekend. But let me just put forth here a sort of thumbnail definition that I hope will serve to sort of anchor our discussion as we proceed over the weekend. And this is my thumbnail definition. As we'll see, we're going to be talking about a work written by Sheikh Taha Jabir Alwani, and that's going to be the basis of our discussion. And he has his own understanding of unity. And I think that there are ways in which he and I overlap. But I want to just make it clear here that what I'm putting forth here is my definition, not his. So if anybody has an issue with it, it's with me, not with Sheikh Taha. All right? Unity is our agreement on what we must have consensus on. Unity is, I should say perhaps, is sustained by our agreement on what we must have consensus on, which means that what we agree we do not have to have consensus on should never threaten our unity. I'll say that again. Unity is, or is sustained by our agreement on what we must have consensus on. And this means that what we agree that we do not have to have consensus on should never threaten our unity. That's my working thumbnail definition of unity. Now, again, we'll be discussing this in a lot more detail over the weekend. And we'll be taking this book. My understanding is that everybody has received a copy of this book. Is that a proper? So I got some bad intel? Should I call out the person who gave me that intel? No, I won't do that. Okay, well, my assumption was that everybody had this book and therefore would know generally what we're talking about. But you'll be fine even if you don't have the book. All right? This book is a book by Sheikh Taha Jabir Alwani, rahimahullah, who passed a few years ago. And it is based on, this book is entitled Preserving Unity and Avoiding Division, a new approach to the ethics of disagreement in Islam. This book is a translation of a book that Sheikh Taha wrote. I believe he published that in 2016. And that book was entitled من أدب الاختلاف إلى نبذ الخلاف, from the ethics of disagreement to the discarding of division, to the discarding of division. Now, Sheikh Taha, back in the 90s, wrote another book in Arabic. It's a very widely read, very famous book, entitled Adab al-Ikhtilaf, the etiquette of disagreement. And this book was translated into something like 18 languages. It went through many, many different reprints. And as I said, it was written sometime in the 1990s. And I just want to invite everybody to think back. Well, maybe everybody can't think back to the 1990s. Am I dating myself? Yeah, okay, all right. Well, imagine what the world in the 1990s must have looked like. And in this book, Sheikh Taha was very much concerned about the degree to which our disagreements was undermining our unity, and therefore undermining our ability to come together and to pool our resources, both material, spiritual, and intellectual in order to empower us to rise to the task of reinstating the Muslim Ummah to its proper status and place in the world. He was very, very much concerned about that. Sheikh Taha was born in Iraq. He moved to Egypt, went to Al-Azhar, graduated from Al-Azhar, came to America later on, and he had all of those, he taught for any number of years in Saudi Arabia in the Islamic University, and so he had all of this wealth of influence, this wealth of experience to inform his perception of what was going on in the Muslim community. This was not based on a very parochial experience. It was based on an experience in many parts of the Muslim world over a long period of life. And at that time, Sheikh Taha was basically of the opinion that our differences reverted largely to two things. One, the widespread religious illiteracy, al-jahl, in the Muslim community. That Muslims had fallen away from a basic literacy of their religion. And in the place of that literacy, they have been inundated by all kinds of ideas, all kinds of presuppositions, all kinds of assumptions that came from the modern West. And these presumptions were read into Islam. And this dislocated the Muslim discourse. They no longer really knew how to engage each other. Not only that, the idea that Western discourse was now the discourse cast Muslim tradition in a negative light. And especially among the elite in the Muslim world, there was this move away from Islamic discourse. In fact, it was looked down upon. And this was reflected also in the second issue that he raised in the educational system. That the education of Islam, I mean, it just plummeted. And all of the quote unquote, the secular disciplines, the secular sciences, to this day, you know, if you, not here, of course, not here, of course, but in a general sense, and I think most of us will attest to this, you know, if you're in any sort of public domain and you sort of want to sound smart, what do? You invoke Aristotle, right? Or Plato, okay? Maybe Foucault, right? Maybe Kant. Do you understand what I'm trying to get at here? All right? And when you do that, you're considered smart, all right? And what happens, according to Sheikh Taha, is that the kinds of assumptions that come from Aristotle, that come from Plato, that come from Foucault, all right? This is now a part of the Muslim interpretive apparatus, all right? And it clashes with Quran, it clashes with Sunnah, it clashes with Muslim tradition, all right? And yet, Muslims oftentimes found themselves in a position where they were only able to sort of consume this Western thought in the most naive and superficial of ways, right? That they did not often have the critical apparatus to disaggregate this thought, all right, in such a way that they could actually bring Islam into conversation with it. As a result of this, Muslim ability to negotiate their issues plummeted drastically, all right? And this was sustained institutionally by the manner in which governments in the Muslim world, all right, arranged the educational system to elevate certain sciences and certain disciplines, all right, and to do the opposite to others. And this is what happened to sort of Islamic education. And Sheikh Taha saw a lot of the inability on the part of Muslims to engage in a way that did not result in not only disagreement, but mutual snubbing, division, mutual snubbing in a way that Muslims could not even stay in the same room almost with each other. And to give you a sense of what he's trying to allude to, I'll give you an example. You know, the famous Al-Tabari, Ibn Jarir Al-Tabari, who wrote that famous tafsir, 30 volumes. Many of us may know this. Tabari was a great a great scholar. In fact, he at one time headed a madhab of his own. All right? But beyond his tafsir, he wrote another book called Ikhtilaf al-Fuqaha, Differences of Opinion Among the Fuqaha. And this book has not been edited yet, at least not to my knowledge. In manuscript, it was about 3,000 pages. Three what? 3,000 pages. Now, Tabari died in the year 310 of the Hijrah. All right? So this is, 310 of the Hijrah. So this is essentially the golden age of Islam. All right? The Muslim community could accommodate this level of disagreement. All right? Ibn al-Mundhir was a contemporary of al-Tabari. All right? Wrote another book called Kitab al-Ijma', which is what? Al-Tabari wrote the book of disagreement. He wrote the book of what? Of agreement. All right? This book is less than 300 pages long. Now, the point that I'm making, and Sheikh Taha is going to get to this, the point that I am making is not that disagreement is good, that disagreement is something that we should be proud of. It is not disagreement that we should be proud of. It is our ability to accommodate disagreement to the point that it does not threaten our unity. And that's why it's important to understand the distinction between consensus or absolute unity, all right, and unity in general. Now, when Sheikh Taha wrote this book, again, this was back in the 90s. He had some very sharp ideas, and tomorrow morning I'm going to get into, some of the details of his evolution. But he came over a period of time to suspect that he had been too accommodating of the idea of khilaf or ikhtilaf in his former book. And he does not say this. This is me reading into Sheikh Taha, all right? But I think that many of us, experience this oftentimes as we move about. We now live in a world that is dominated by the history of the West over the last 300 years. Anybody disagree with that? I didn't ask you if you like it. I don't like it. That's not the question. All right? Well, the history of the West, in some ways, has become the history of the world. Everybody assumes that what happened in the West, all right, represents human society. Not Western society, but human society. All right? And so what happens with religion in the West, and religion in the West was what? Christianity. What happens with Christianity in the West becomes religion in the world. All right? And the wars of religion that were fought in Europe left the Europeans with a sense that among the apex values of society, in order to keep society together, to keep it cohesive from falling apart, was the value of tolerance. Because intolerance had torn Europe apart. You should read some of the descriptions of what actually happened. All right? It was quite horrible. Okay? In that context, anytime we speak through the voice of religion, all right, one of the voices that's looking over our shoulder, all right, is asking, well, how tolerant is this religion that you have? Right? Because religion in the modern world sort of has to prove itself. All right? And when I say religion again, I'm going back to what? That European experience. All right? Okay? We know what it did then. What guarantees are you going to give me now, since you want to advocate religion, that is not going to do that again? All right? And so the idea that tolerance is something through which religion can sort of repurchase, a place in the modern world. All right? Many of us are affected by that. Whether we want to admit that or acknowledge that or not. And so maybe Sheikh Taha was seeing this khilaf in Islam, all right, as being representative of the degree of tolerance that Islam, all right, could accommodate. He came, however, to become suspicious of his own attitude. And by the way, this book by Sheikh Taha is clearly written by a man who has reached a certain age in life. You know, age is liberating because this gray stuff reminds you where you're headed. And so Sheikh Taha was very keen on examining his own legacy, of criticizing and critiquing his own legacy in an effort to rid it of anything that might be misleading or harmful to the Muslims. And he came to the conclusion that maybe he was a bit too overindulgent of the idea of ikhtilaf. Because in the book, Adab al-Ikhtilaf, in a sense, ikhtilaf takes on a quasi-positive meaning, all right? That this is something that in fact Muslims should be proud of, all right? And that they certainly should not be alarmed by it, all right? But then he came later to the conclusion that, okay, ikhtilaf may be something that we have to come to terms with, but it is certainly not something that we should extol. And it is certainly not something that we should simply surrender to on the understanding that there's nothing that we can do about it. And in this new reading of his own work, Sheikh Taha says his attempt is to privilege the Quran. And he says that in the Quran, if it's read carefully, we will see that khilaf is not a positive thing. Religious communities differing is not a positive thing. And that it is unity that the Quran extols as a positive, right? And so what he's doing now is evolving in his understanding of the relationship between disagreement and unity. And what he wants to argue is that ultimately, yes, we may have disagreements, but we should not simply surrender to disagreement as something that we simply can't do anything about. Because disagreement has a nasty habit of developing into schism, all right? And once that schism occurs, then our hearts are divided. We can't pool our resources. We can't bring our minds together. We can't bring our hearts together, all right? We cannot do what we need to do as an ummah. And as an ummah, what we need to do is to recognize that our fundamental task, that on which we must have consensus, is that we are an ummah that inherited the risala of the Prophet ﷺ. And that our apex mission is to represent and to deliver that risala to the world. That is what we must have unanimous consensus on among ourselves, right? And nothing outside of that should undermine our unity to the point that we cannot fulfill that fundamental duty, right? So over the weekend, we're going to be going through Sheikh Taha's work, and let me just give you a sense of what we're going to be doing. I mean, I want to make it clear that and let me just speak for myself. There are going to be other speakers. They can speak for themselves as well. When I present Sheikh Taha's work, you're gonna think that I agree with everything in it, and you should, because I'm trying to present it in the most positive light that I can in order to be fair to him, and in order to get you to take his point of view seriously. That presentation, however, does not mean that I necessarily agree with everything that he's saying. Doesn't mean that I disagree either, all right? But the fact that I try to present it in the best light, all right, is for the purpose of giving it a fair hearing, all right? But we will also be critically engaging any number of ideas in Sheikh Taha's work, all right? And let me just say here on a personal note, and I'll end in just a few more minutes. I knew Sheikh Taha. When I lived in Egypt, I used to visit him at his home. We had many conversations. And I remember once he's telling me that, you know, he said, they're never going to understand you until you die. He said, they're never going to understand you until you die. And I've thought about that often. And I don't want to do to him what I don't want anybody doing to me after I die. So when I engage him, even if I'm critical, I'm doing what Sheikh Taha himself would have me do. And it's the same thing that I hope people would do to my legacy once I die. All right? Critique it for the purpose of avoiding any harm, any misleading that may come to the Muslims. That's the whole point of his re-examination of his own work. All right? So I want to be clear. I'm not taking pot shots at my friend Sheikh Taha Jabal Adwani, rahimahullah. All right? I'm simply approaching it in the spirit that he would have me approach it. So Sheikh Taha talks about in this book his evolution, how he moved from, a place where ikhtilaf was sort of positive to a more critical understanding of ikhtilaf. All right? And we'll lay that out. He then goes on into the etiquette of disagreement. What is it that we can disagree about? What is it that we should not disagree about? How do we handle those disagreements, all right, that are acceptable disagreements? What is the difference between an acceptable and an unacceptable disagreement? All right? Is the nature of the issue involved, does that affect the kind of disagreement that we have? All these things we'll talk about tomorrow on Sunday. Sheikh Taha is big on the issue of kalam, scholastic theology, because he sees that as one of the bases upon which lots of disagreement among the Muslim community emerged. And by the way, by disagreement here, he's not simply talking about difference of opinion. He's talking about schism, furqa, division, all right? Mutual snubbing, that each group says, I'm an island unto myself, and until they come here and agree with me, they too are an island unto themselves. This is what Sheikh Taha is talking about. And he sees the scholastic theology as one of the contributing factors to that. All right? And he's not criticizing scholastic theology as a whole. Not at all. Not at all. He himself was a proud Ash'ari, just so that people know that. All right? But he's saying the way that scholastic theology was sometimes engaged by some of the Islamic movements, all right, tended to result in this furqa, all right, in this mutually distinct islands among themselves, unto themselves, all right? So then he goes into other varieties of disagreement. We can disagree on issues of interpretation of the Quran, disagree on issues of interpretation of the Sunnah, disagree on issues of whether this particular hadith or that particular hadith is sound or not. And if it's weak, what do we do with that? We can differ on all these things. Is that the same as disagreeing on what the speed limit should be? All right? Or any number of other administrative arrangements that we might have to make as a Muslim community. All right? I mean, to run this masjid, we have to have certain rules about like where you put your shoes. Well, should we put them there or should we put them there? All right? What do we do about those kinds of disagreements? And finally, Sheikh Taha puts forward what he calls a blueprint for moving forward. And here he really gets into the discussion of the modern Muslim movements, that he thinks that on the one hand, going back to what they call the Sahwa Islamiyya, these movements were very promising in the initial stages. But they're falling into disagreement and mutual snubbing really weakened their efficacy, and it strengthened the hand of those who did not want Islam to restate itself to its proper place in the world. So he wants to lay out what he sees as a blueprint for moving forward. I mean, as I said, we'll talk about all this, and hopefully what we will end up with is a presentation of Sheikh Taha's view, a critical engagement with that view, and then a critical engagement with you along with the questions. And hopefully, the goal will be that we'll all go out of here with a higher, more sophisticated, more functional and useful understanding of ikhtilaf and agreement. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله ثم أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Of course, it goes without saying that it is a great honor and a great privilege to be a part of such a blessed assembly. And I don't say that as an empty pleasantry or a mere nicety or just something to be polite. I really think about people giving up their Friday evenings, coming to the masjid in hope of learning something that will enhance, enrich, and beautify, quite frankly, our collective understanding of Islam and our commitment to some kind of shared vision, God willing. Thinking about this topic, I was reminded of something we had discussed previously in Imam Ghazali's book, Al-Faisal al-Tafriqa, Bayn al-Islam wa Zandaqa, in which he talked about a principle of aqeedah, a principle of theology that most Muslim schools of theology share, and that is that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is ma'asumun min al-khat, that the Prophet alayhi wasallam is divinely protected from error, that in his interpretation of the religion, in his explication of the religion, the Prophet ﷺ is divinely protected from making a mistake in how he teaches, explicates, or demonstrates the truth of this religion. So Imam Ghazali says that the Prophet ﷺ alone is the one that agreement with him is the process through which faith inheres. This is how one attains unto faith, is to agree with the Prophet ﷺ. And the way one commits disbelief is to say that what the Prophet ﷺ said was untrue. And so Imam Ghazali said, if anybody takes their school or their sheikh or anything that does not have that isma, that divine protection from error, and puts that individual or that school in the place of the Prophet ﷺ, saying that no, faith actually inheres by agreeing with this person, and that disbelief inheres by disagreeing with this person, is actually closer to the disbelief they're charging than the person they are charging. And that in the absence of something that is absolutely determinative in terms of consensus, the only thing that we can do is tolerate a multiplicity of opinion. And I remember reading that as a young Muslim, I joined a religious community that I would describe as a quarrelsome religious community. I became Muslim when I was 16. And I'm talking about, it was literally, you went into the mosque and people would ask you, where have you been praying? You would say, well, I pray here. Those people, they don't know anything about Islam. Stay away from them. Then you would go here. Where have you been praying? I prayed over there. Those people don't know anything about Islam. Stay away from them. Furqa, schism. And I would think about this statement of Imam Ghazali, and I would say, this might be something that if we shared this, if we made this knowledge more accessible, more proximate to people, it might serve as a criterion through which we could sustain interreligious pluralism in theology. But then after some time, that toleration of difference, that ability to sustain that intramural conversation became like a celebration of difference. I remember distinctly sitting in lecture halls in which we were saying this ability to sustain, these conversations about the will of God, about the names and attributes of God. This is the sine qua non. This is the essence of Islamic civilization. And while I still appreciate the embrace of pluralism and indeterminacy, meaning when we can't come to a definitive agreement about something, we agree to let God adjudicate. We let God judge. I am becoming more concerned about how some of those attitudes affect or negatively impact our ability to galvanize, our ability to work together when it is necessary for us to work together. And I'll give you a sense of what I have in mind. In a certain sense, disagreement, and by disagreement I mean schism, is the de facto state of different communities. I remember we were sitting in an Islamic history class, and somehow somebody brought up, I don't know how this made its way into an Islamic history class, but somebody brought up the Northern Irish and the Southern Irish, Protestants and Catholics, and that they had been fighting this intergenerational war, this internecine war for many generations, and somebody said facetiously they should all just become Muslim. This would end the conflict. And the sheikh said, no, half would become Sunni, and the other half would become Shi'i, and the fighting would continue. Right? This idea that when you see unity among a group, this is always a sign that they have been blessed. Unity is something that we recognize as being from providence. Unity is providential. When you see a group of people, in spite of their different histories, in spite of their different schools of interpretation, in spite of their different ethnicities, their different languages, and that community is able to be united, not uniform. I think, Dr. Jackson was saying earlier that consensus and unity are not the same things. I don't ever think our community will be uniform. In fact, I think it is a great feature of our community that we are not uniform. But when our embrace of pluralism begins to compromise our investment in a collective mission, I think that embrace of pluralism needs to be re-examined. And this is what I hope to achieve over the course of the weekend. What does it mean? You know, for us to acknowledge that over the course of our history, Muslims have not agreed on everything. That's what we call tahsil al-hasil. We know that already. But how do we, what does it mean to be united in spite of those differences? So, to contemporize this, you know, they say that in this, in the recent election, presidential election, Muslims were almost equally divided. 30% Trump, 30% Harris, 30% Green Party. And if something like that is inevitable, then it's inevitable. But it is impossible not to recognize the extent to which that outcome reduces the efficacy of a community for whom political, economic, and even cultural capital is very precious. And re-engaging a conversation around unity, around shared goals, around a collective vision is what I hope, you know, comes out of this weekend. And the last thing I'll say about this as we wind down and prepare for Isha is that, you know, what I have in mind is that unity does not grow out of relativism. It doesn't mean that, well, since nothing is really true and it doesn't really matter that you have arrived to this conclusion and I have arrived to this conclusion. No, we're not relativistic. All of us should follow the dictates of his or her conscience. But unity, to my mind, comes out of a recognition that we need each other. That I won't be able to realize the fullness of my mission without you. And you won't be able to realize the fullness of your mission without me. So, do we have the means to engage in intentional conversation about what the terms of our unity could look like? And I think that Sheikh Taha, in this book, is reintroducing this idea, centering in his kind of interpretive ambit the Quran. That if we center the book of Allah, this might give us the means to unite in spite of some of our differences. And if we can unite, it increases the efficacy of our community and the likelihood that we can achieve our highest priority, which is conveying the risala of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know, the Prophet alayhi wasallam said, "Balligh anni walau ayah," convey something about me, even if it's a single ayah. So as a community, we have to be concerned about how we have organized, how we have assembled, how we have understood our relationship to each other vis-a-vis that mission. And if we have assembled in ways that compromise that mission, or we have organized or understood our relationship to each other in ways that compromise that mission, then we should be willing to re-examine those ways that we've understood our relationships. And Allah knows best.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I was wondering, how did you decide on this topic at this point in time? What made this feel especially relevant or urgent and necessary for right now?
I notice he moves the mic to me, but that's all right. I think, quite frankly, I think this topic is relevant all the time. I think that, and it's,
Also,
quite frankly, quite frankly, I think this topic is relevant all the time, and I think it's relevant especially in this time. I've been a Muslim going on 50 years in this country, and I can't remember, with the possible exception of the 1990s, experiencing the Muslim community in America as fractured as it is now. I think that some of that has to do with issues that are beyond our control. You know, in the Quran, in Surah Al-Qalam, Allah relates the story of a people who, make a very long story short, you know, He granted them orchards, and they had all of this, you know, this lush vegetation that they were growing, and then they decided to get stingy with it and not share it with the poor, and so Allah decided to destroy their orchards. And so when they came in the morning and they saw their orchards, you know, they were in shock because their orchards had been destroyed. And among the first things that Allah says, subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, فَأَقْبَلَ بَعْضُهُمْ عَلَى بَعْضٍ يَتَلَاوَمُونَ. And so what we have here, you know, when a community is afflicted with some external affliction, all right, one of their tendencies, just as a matter of the sociology of groups, one of their tendencies is to turn on each other, all right, and to try to make each other responsible for what has afflicted them from without. And we have been afflicted over the last so many years with some pretty serious stuff and some pretty difficult challenges from without. And the last challenge that we have seen, still unfolding now, in Gaza, and in Sudan, and in Myanmar, and in China. I mean, we have lots of really horrific afflictions that have come to us from without. And so our tendency has been just that, to turn on one another. To turn on one another as, well, if you had done this, we wouldn't be here. No, if you had done that, we wouldn't be here. No, it's because your lax practice that we're here. So we have this tendency to turn in on each other, all right? And all of that undermines our unity, all right? And to my mind, if I may speak frankly, I think we have to be aware of the extent to which we approach decadence when we conduct ourselves like that. And what I mean by decadence is I mean that a people who do something for the purpose of enhancing their position, all right, while exactly what they do harms their position. And they don't see it as harming their position. So everything they do to try to help their position, they end up deeper in the hole. All right? And rather than back off of that, we double down on it. And so for me, we are taken farther from our destination the more we double and triple down on it. And so for me, I mean, I wish we didn't have to discuss this kind of conversation. We didn't have to discuss this conversation. We didn't have to have this conversation. But I see, I mean, if there's any moment, you know, in which we need to be reminded of who we are and what we're supposed to be doing and how the differences that divide us cannot override the fundamental consensus that we have, and that is that we are the Ummah of Muhammad, and we have been charged with carrying, delivering the Risala of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and nothing can come between us and that Risala.
just speaking to that, you know, this topic in this book has really pushed me out of my comfort zone. I think that in a lot of the circles I frequent, a kind of very argumentative, divisive kind of differing is not really in vogue. We don't really do, that was much more the 90s, early 2000s. We're not going around arguing with each other about Al-Qaeda and things like that, but we have settled into this kind of détente, this kind of mutual and shared understanding that you do your thing and I do my thing. And I think we have, within the community, sought out these echo chambers that I just want to spend time with the Muslims with whom I agree, and I derive great comfort from their companionship and their company, and the Muslims with whom I disagree, I just don't really engage them. I can't really say that, we sit and we talk badly about them, or not. I haven't really seen those kinds of very aggressively divisive religious cultures in some time. But I think this book is pushing us to re-examine even like those people that I've casually kind of written off as just, hey, and how real can we get here? They're just Salafi. They're Salafi and I'm not. Right? They're Salafi, I'm not. I don't pray there. I don't really talk, I don't really engage them much. They don't engage me much. We both live, I'm from Chicago. We might be separated by just a couple of blocks. I remember going to, where all of this was drawn into the sharpest relief was the first time I was invited to give a lecture in Birmingham, in England. They took me to Green Road or Green Street. Man, I had never seen that kind of just fractious, this group, this group, this group, this group, this group. I walked into the masjid and somebody said, "Are you Ubaydullah Evans?" I said, depends on what he did, right? Yeah. "Are you a bill collector?" No, I'm kidding. Said, who wants to know? He said, "Please honor us, give the khutbah." I said, "Oh no, He said, "Please." So I gave the khutbah. And then after the khutbah, the same person that asked me to give the khutbah, I went to give him salam, he wouldn't return my salam. I said, he said, "No, you're wearing a tie." Because I had a jacket, I had a tie on, And I was just like, man, this is crazy. So it's not like that, but we are very, I think perhaps too satisfied with, hey, you do your thing, we're doing our thing. And I'm thinking, this book is pushing us to redefine those boundaries of community. Is there a way that we could see ourselves as united, as opposed to just, hey, just tolerating? We're not abusing each other, we're not attacking each other, we're not insulting each other, but there certainly is no urgency to work together or be together. And I think this book, and for me, it pushed me way out of my comfort zone. It's kind of pushing me to think about how that very polite kind of détente is maybe compromising our ability to deliver the risal of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
I don't want to go too far on this because this is just one question, but I'm not sure. I'm not so sure. The problem is that we have this false détente, and let me just for the record, I think that it's on some level it is natural for people to be attracted to people who are like and think like them. That is not something I think that we should shy away from. The problem, however, is that in the absence of a higher mission, we have nothing to domesticate those allegiances. What do I mean by that? Let me...
Want people to hear what you're saying.
I don't know about that, man. Anyway. Look, we all have ethnic and racial identities. All right? And let me just speak for myself. All right? I'm a black American. I have no intention of being anything other than a black American. And I am organically, يعني بالعصبية, attached even to the broader black American community. All right? All right? And I expect other people in this room, whether they admit it or not, to be organically connected to their own affiliation. All right? And one of the challenges that we confront in America is, unlike back home, we have one or two or three affiliations. We have something along the 60s and 70s affiliations among us as Muslims. All right? The problem we have is not that, I don't like spicy food. And then the Dacey brothers, I ain't feeling it. All right? But here's the issue. If Islam and the Risala of Islam, the idea that we must model and deliver this message, all right? Not overnight, not over a decade, maybe not even over a lifetime, but that is what we have to be aspiring to do. And when that mission calls upon me to do something with you and your spicy food, I'm not joking here. That mission has to domesticate whatever other affiliations I have, whatever other allegiances I have. I still have them, but they're domesticated. All right? They're tamed. All right? They work for me. I don't work for them. All right? And I think that oftentimes what ends up dividing us more is we try to pound people out of their commitments, out of their affiliations. You can't be white. You can't be black. We Muslim, akhi. You can't be Arab. You can't be Salafi. You can't be Ashari. You can't be Salafi. You can't be Ashari. All right? All of these things are going to exist. The question is, do we have a higher sense of mission that could domesticate all of these commitments? That becomes the issue. Does everybody understand what I mean when I say that? No? Let me try to give you a more concrete example. If you're married, right? See? Right? They're gonna be differences, right? But the value of maintaining and preserving this marriage domesticates those differences. You understand what I'm talking about? It tames them. It keeps them from getting out of hand. All right? And you say, yeah, she's wrong. Yeah, he's wrong. I ain't going nowhere. Do you follow what I mean by that? And we can swallow that, all right, for the purpose of enhancing the relationship that we want to preserve. All right? We have to realize that, look, we need so many actors. Right now, what we are experiencing as a Muslim community, in fact, as all religious communities around the world, all right, the last 300 years or so have completely destroyed the plausibility structure of religion. It's just not cool. It's just not fashionable to be openly religious in the world today. We have to acknowledge that, all right? And while all of our fiqh and our aqidah, these are important things, all right? They are central to our Islam, all right? But beyond those, we as a community have to reconstruct a plausibility structure for Islam in this country and in the world. And that's going to take all of us. And these petty divisions, when I say petty, I don't mean that they're not meaningful. Look here. You talking about relativism? I'm not a relativist. Let me get that straight right now. Okay? The truth exists. And I know what it is. Me. I know what it is. I got the truth. But to my Muslim brother, I also know that you may have your version of it too. And I'm not the prophet. I'm not ma'soom. I cannot impose my view on you. And for that reason, we have to find a way to get that higher commitment that we have, all right, to modeling and carrying this risala, to domesticate all those differences that we have. That doesn't mean that we don't have them. That doesn't mean we don't debate them. That doesn't mean that you don't tell me that you think I'm wrong. That's fine. But how you tell me I'm wrong, how far are you going telling me I'm wrong? Does that compromise the mission? You see, part of our problem And this is where the false they talk, we're comfortable because we ain't got no mission. We ain't got no mission. We just a bunch of free-floating electrons just floating around. We don't have a mission. And that's why it's so easy for you to hurt my feelings. That's why it's so easy for you to attack me. You know why? Because if you had a sense of mission, you would see me as part of your team. And you would see what happens to me as happening to your mission. Because you ain't got no mission, you don't care what happens to me. And I don't care what happens to you. That's what I'm talking about in terms of decadence. So I attack you for the purpose, I think, of preserving the deen. And if we want to get into some of these theological details, we can. I don't think that's necessarily relevant. But for the purpose of preserving the deen. But what you're saying is not kufr. It's not shirk. It's just not my opinion. This is what I think we have to come to terms to. And by the way, I know that there are many people in this room who think on some level this whole conversation is missing the point. Why? Because many of the things that divide us have very little to do with the fiqhiyat or these issues on aqeedah. All right? It's some of our political positions. All right? It's some of our economic positions. It's some of our social positions. I mean, issues that we have to find ways of being able to discuss, all right, and negotiate without them tearing us apart. I mean, this is amazing, all right? You can't give me, you got a parking lot out there, right? Got a space for the imam? Huh? Okay. Based on what? Did you follow what I mean by that? All right? We have to find a way to discuss these and to debate these things, all right? Right? Got nothing to do with Aqidah. Got nothing to do with fiqh, all right? How are we going to arrange ourselves as a community, all right, without that tearing us apart? That is what divides us more often, all right, than these fiqh and these Aqidah issues on a daily basis. I'm not saying that the fiqh issues are the point. Yes, we have fiqh differences. Nobody knows that better than me. We have Aqidah differences, no, all right? But it's these daily, everyday issues, all right? Okay? That breeds so much internal bleeding among us. All right? And that's what we have to find a way to domesticate, inshallah ta'ala.
I have a question back here from brother.
They can hear me, I'm talking.
So you kind of just went into this right now.
Excuse me, where are you?
I'm right here.
Oh, I have to see, because
Okay.
see
that's
all
fine.
this? I know someday it's coming, and when I hear voices,
Is this okay?
yes, thank you.
All right. So now you've gotten into it a little bit, but what I'm very confused about is the relationship between this mission that you guys keep talking about and the division. What is the mission? And I'm not asking you to answer that question right now, but I think to what degree is that the cause of the disunity? That we don't know what the mission is? Because I don't feel like, many people I've spoken to feel like we don't know what to do. You say spread, do we, is it okay, let's help Gaza, okay, let's find a parking spot for the imam. What is, and to what degree, obviously I'm not asking to answer a question of what is the mission tonight, perhaps that's
You can ask it.
Well, then I'll ask it, because I think that's what we're yearning for, and I think that is sometimes and also then to what degree is that absence of a mission or the confusion about the mission the cause of the disunity? Okay, that's the question.
I wanna have Ubaydullah answer this question, but let me just say this as a preliminary. I'm not arguing that the lack of mission is the cause of difference. All right? The lack of mission is what allows our differences of opinion to get out of hand. It's what allows us to destroy each other, all right? Because I become the focal point, and there's nothing beyond me to focus on. And so therefore I, okay, want to subjugate you into my point of view, all right? Even if that destroys your ability to be a part, all right, of this effort to carry and deliver this risala of Muhammad to the world. Now, that's a very vague answer to your question. And the mission is vague. You might not know what concretely serves the mission in this instance or that instance. But if you and I are united on the mission, then that can mediate our discussion on what we do. And you see yourself, or you see me, as trying to serve the mission. I see you as trying to serve the mission. And so we're right back where the Sahaba were. That's why you can disagree. Because they recognize he's trying to serve the mission just like I'm trying to serve the mission. So let me listen to him. Let me see what he has to say. And you're saying the same thing. Because what's important? Not you, not me, the mission. And the mission is to carry and to deliver this risala to the world.
One thing that I've always, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, observed is that there's nothing wrong with being a person that has a very strong constitution, in that you have commitments. However, I find that within almost every tradition, and Sheikh Taha does a very good job of elucidating this within this book, you have those more partisan, more sectarian voices. And then within that very tradition, you have more ecumenical voices. Sometimes you even see over the course of a given scholar's evolution, maybe they started out a lot more hard line, willing to draw much harder lines in the sand. And then toward the end of their lives, they reassess some of those earlier positions, and they appear to have a greater appreciation for Muslim unity. The lack of a mission, to me, is what leads us to adopt the harder line, more sectarian, more divisive positions, even within the schools, traditions, and movements to which we are beholden. So I was talking to a brother yesterday, and we were talking about our experience in Chicago as Muslims over the last, it's hard for me to imagine that I've been Muslim for 26 years. Subhanallah wa bihamdihi, subhanallah al-azim. Yeah, what is that? So I don't have no white stuff yet. I get it, but when I see it, I pick it out with the tweezer. Yeah, my wife can't stand it too. She said, "Stop lying to the people. Let it grow in." Not yet. And take it out. And we were saying how we've seen people, and you have two scholars that represent one exponent of Islam. One of them is older. He has white hair in his beard. And he's saying, I used to be hard line. I probably contributed to this, polemical culture of debate and division and separation. Boy, did I waste my time. Now he's 70. I really wish that the positions I had taken about this or that, I really wish I would have done that differently. But then there's the 28-year-old recent graduate of the Jami'ah, the recent graduate of the university, who's hardline. Why do we gravitate toward the latter and not the former? Why is it that person, he represents for us, a purity of creed. He represents what it means to be committed to the minhaj, or the madhab, or the tariqah, or the tayyar. But the older person that's been there, that's saying, I really wish that I had a greater appreciation for Muslim kind of ecumenical dialogue when I was younger. To us, that's tamayyun. He's watered down. That's not, that's not, he's not really on it. What I would like to probe is, what does it mean to be on it? What is it? See, that guy, he's, at some point, I mean, I've had people tell me, he used to be a sheikh, but at some point he got soft. No, I'm saying, at some point he got soft. And so I'm thinking, so you're more inspired by factionalism than you are by unity. Maybe this is something that should be reassessed. And Allah knows best. Right?
I think on the one hand, believe it or not, there was a day when it was all black. I was young once, and I think that it's natural for young people. What you described as extreme, when you're young, it's not extreme, it's ideal. And a young person wants the ideal, wants the straight, no chasing. They're still in the phase of asserting themselves. And so what they want is that which seems closer to the ideal. And so there's a natural sort of attraction to that. And I think that's just built into the nature of who we are as human beings. I think as well, however, that what you're talking about in terms of people being attracted to it, it's not always the doctrinaire individual who's attracted to it. I think that what often attracts people to the more, what's the word you use? I'm going to use your word. Extreme? The more extreme is fear. Because if I'm with that which appears to be more extreme, then I'm safe from it. If I'm not, I'm subject to it. I think that oftentimes explains some of that. But all of this, I think, we have to bring it into a process where it can be negotiated and debated, with a possible outcome being not consensus, but simply unity.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank y'all both kindly. My question kind of, I guess for me, the topic sort of presupposes that an antecedent conversation has taken place with regards to reasonable ways of assessing facts on the ground, because I don't know how one is to execute this mission without reasonable, not necessarily correct, reasonably established facts on the ground. If my brother or sister, and we agree that we have a mission, if they come and tell me, the sky is gray, I could reasonably believe that because we just got a lot of rain. If they tell me it's purple, I could reasonably believe that could be a sunset. But if they tell me, it's, I don't know, light green with like hot pink purple polka dots, we might agree that we have a mission, but I don't know how we can actually execute that mission if the assessment of reality is kind of warped. And this gets into kind of being in this sort of post-truth era that I think has also infected our community. So my question is it moot to actually have this conversation without discussing how we can have some sort of paradigm for reasonably assessing, even with all our differences, the facts on the ground? Thank you.
But I don't think that the problem is in our misdiagnosis necessarily of the facts on the ground. I think the problem is in our inability to negotiate them. If, if I'm actually interested in the mission, then I'm willing to listen to you. Tell me what you think will serve the mission better. All right? And I have a more agnostic attitude toward my own point of view. And that's what I think is missing. I mean, we have to accept the fact that, we have to accept the fact that our assessments can be wrong. I can assess something wrong. You can assess something wrong. The imam can assess something wrong. That doesn't make him a bad individual. You got to kick him out of the imamate. He's just a human being. That's why he's got us around to try to help him assess these things. So we might get things wrong, all right? But as long as we have a higher mission, then we will have the will and the ability to detect our errors and eliminate our errors and keep on moving forward. I think many times, we're scared to make a mistake because that's the end. What community can survive like that? That was the Sahaba?
Let's just
Assalamu alaikum. It kind of piggybacks off that question. If, for example, let's say we were speaking earlier and you were saying that the book are the central sort of what centralizes our mission. And let's get a little bit more specific. And to this point about the facts, there's the ayah about like unfuku amwalakum fi sabilillah, right? And let's say that we're gonna talk about the mission of American Muslims. And how I interpret that specific ayah in this current time might mean something more specific like, I don't know, buying a politician that can actually help with that mission.
Don't put it like that, but I get you.
But you know what I'm trying to say, right? But some other people are gonna read that and say, I don't know, man, like, it's about my pocketbook, right? The economic thing that you're talking about. So if the fact is that I'm willing to sit at that same table and listen to you tell me that you want to renovate the marble in the bathroom, but I think that that money could go to something way more effective that's going to help my neighbors and all of us, immigrants, non-immigrants, converts, diaspora, whomever, that makes it very challenging. I feel like that I care about you and I care about us, but I feel like that's I think where I would like more clarity, and maybe that's what the workshop is.
Yeah, very quickly in response to your query, none of the issues that you raised was a question of haram halal. It's halal, assuming.
No.
It's right, okay, so it's halal to donate to this campaign. It's halal to do the marble in the bathroom. It's halal, I forget what the third one was. Huh? All right, okay. But these are halal options, all right? And so what we're dealing with are questions of effectiveness, efficiency, of thrift, and these kinds of considerations. In that regard, why should our conversations about these things differ from the kinds of conversations we have at work in our corporations every day? Does anybody understand what I mean by that? We're not talking about haram. We're talking about what's good for the company. All right? And we have there, don't put too sharp a point on this. See, we should have, Allah looking down and saying, yeah, that's the one I want to reward. I want to get the most reward from Allah. At work, we know the boss is going to get word about this meeting. He knows who said what, and whose ideas were good, and whose ideas were going to serve the mission of the company more. All right? And we appeal to that. Efficiency, order, thrift, time, etc. Why do our conversations within our masjids on these kinds of issues, which is not haram halal, why should that differ from the way we are at work? Why? That's a question we have to ask ourselves. Did that at least go some way to your question?
It goes,
because I think that's part of the problem.
Right, that we can't have that conversation.
That's right. But why can't we have it?
That's I would love to know.
Well, I think that because we tend to turn everything, all right? In other words, the mubah is the permissible is a broad category, all right? But the permissible is not going to tell us what to do. It's simply going to say it's permissible to do this, or this. And we as a community have to figure out, well, which one of those is more efficient? Which one of those is more economical? Which one? All right? And as long as the mission is clear, we can have that debate and differ. Right? Because you're not trying to just win me over to your side, subjugate my soul, assert your superiority over me. You're simply saying, no, just look at it. Just think about it. Here's some facts. Here's some data. All right, let's try it. Just like you do at work. Every day. Why is that so hard for us?
I got the mic now. I'm over here. My name is Haroon. Nice to meet y'all. Nice to meet you, Haroon. My question originally wasn't going to be connected to that, but now it is. Because in my head, from what I'm hearing, like, I don't really feel like I have a problem with, like, I don't think anybody in this room should or would have a problem with what you're saying in terms of, like, as long as we got this overarching mission, like, there's a banner we can all fall behind and we can march as follows. That sounds great, but for me, that sounds too good to be true. Like, that just sounds like some kumbaya stuff. Like, it genuinely just feels too good to be true. I do a lot of work on the ground. What I mean by that is I throw a lot of different types of events. I see a lot of different types of people. I can see how somebody, I can see why, like, somebody would not treat this conversation regarding, let's say, politics, economics, and so on and so forth, like another day at work. And the reason being is because for a lot of people, I think a lot of these conversations do hold the weight of halal and haram in the way that I think customs, like urf, has weight in law. And what I mean by that is, like, it's really, really tough to talk to, like, a Palestinian homie, or I'm Rohingya, right, or like a fellow Rohingyan. And I'm a college-educated Rohingyan. And I'm telling them to vote one way, or look at politics in one way, or look at, like, living in a certain place in one way, and they're looking at it as direct correlation to their livelihood and to their existence. And I think to that degree, it's like in the sense of preserving life, or life for themselves and their kids, that's where that stake is held at, I think, when I'm talking to most people. And it's like, you know, it's like it's a really weird conversation when I feel like somebody's family is dying anyway, be it here in America, like down the street in Oakland, or like overseas, for me to talk to them and be like, hey, listen, man, at the end of the day, it's cool. We're both Muslim. La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. We're under the same banner, we're under the same mission. And so my question was originally more about the means. Because I don't know how to approach that conversation. I know why we can't have the conversation like we do at work, because it's emotionally charged. Like, people got families, they gotta feed them, there's a sense to, like, protect them. Whereas when I'm at work, I don't care, I'm gonna get my paycheck. Every 2 weeks I'm gonna cash out, I'm gonna go home, I'm chilling. I'm gonna watch Netflix at home. I'm good, right? And I think to that degree, so I feel I might be over time here, but you get what I'm saying here is, like, it's a matter of means for me. It's like, how do I look somebody in the eye and be like, yeah, bro, I might have voted this way, or I voted this other way. Here are the economic considerations I had in mind, but I really think it's gonna be great for both of us. And to them, they're looking at me like, yo, dog, I'm gonna get deported. Like, that's the end of the road for me. The hell you talking about? Sorry, I don't know if I could say hell in the Muslim like that, but you know what I'm saying? Like, what are you talking about? You made this economic bet? That bet included my livelihood. How are you going to tell me, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, we're on the same banner? We're not. You don't care for me like that. And that's the kind of conversations I'm looking at people in the eye and having, you know what I'm saying? So that, I think Ubaydullah said, how real can we be? I just chose to be real. My bad.
No, I appreciate
I be like that sometimes, but thank you. I appreciate both of you for being here.
No, I appreciate
Inshallah,
that.
we'll make this the last question. Inshallah, I know there's more questions, but inshallah, the conversation continues tomorrow morning. I know.
You know,
I'm sorry.
One of the most Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You know, one of the most interesting findings within this particular book is that Sheikh Taha, and this is something that I have a deep misgiving about myself, because when thinking about, like, a mission or a trajectory, I'm concerned that if this is something left to negotiation, then the communities or the elements of the community that have greater representation numerically, greater economic capacity, greater visibility, greater institutional capacity, they might be able to make an agenda which serves their particular interests, the collective mission. And now you are tasked with supporting the mission. Even if you feel that your own trajectory is undermined or compromised by this new collective mission. And one of the things that Sheikh Taha is asserting in this book that we're covering over the course of the weekend is that the Quran does contain principles. It does have rules of engagement. So that when we sit down and you are saying, okay, this is the way that we should collectively approach this or that issue, and I have a differing point of view, I have an opposing point of view, there should be some grounds upon which we can, appeal to each other's sense of good judgment. If after that process, and we engage it as earnestly and as openly as we possibly can, we still can't arrive at a single conclusion, then maybe we recognize that we have a difference of degree and not kind in our pursuit of our mission. Meaning, we are pursuing, for instance, a dignified existence in America as Muslims, and we want to realize, some of our agreed upon goals as a religious community. Now, for me, and this is real for me, this is not hypothetical, a lot of those goals will probably reflect my belongingness to an African American community, my situatedness in a place like Chicago, a very urban community, and all of the historical inheritances that come from that. Somebody else that has a different location, maybe has a different understanding of what the specifics of the mission entail. But even then, we recognize that we have the same mission, a dignified existence for Muslims in America. And that can govern that exchange. That can domesticate some of how we approach those differences. And in that context, I said, may the best argument win. And there's a statement that for me is just very aspirational, that is attributed to Imam Shafi'i, radiallahu anhu, in which he said, I have never engaged anybody in argument except that my ardent hope was that Allah made the truth apparent on the tongue of that individual, and that I would have the honor of submitting to it. That I would have the honor of saying, you know what, you're right. So I would hope that we could have that kind of heightened spiritual realization, and this would inform the decorum with which we approached those practical, real differences. But yeah, I agree with you. There are some things that would probably present themselves as insoluble, right? And I think, thinking about what we do with those insoluble differences, that's something we really have to, work out. And Allah knows best.
I don't think that this is a pipe dream. I mean, would you say it sounds like
It's too fluffy.
too fluffy? Because no. But I think that, and you alluded to this, we have to recognize the enormity of the task that we're charged with. As I said here, we got something like 67 nationalities in one community here in America. All right, and that's different perspectives, that's different backgrounds, that's different experiences, that's different trajectories in terms of how we measure and assess what our interest as a Muslim community is. All right, it's the mission even when we all equally recognize what the mission is, we may still, in fact, we probably will disagree on what is the best way to serve that mission, what should be prioritized and what should not. And that's part of what we have to learn how to negotiate. In terms of what you said, though, I mean, you said that you voted for this, and I'm going to get deported. So what you're saying is that my deportation is the determining factor in terms of what we should do as a community? That comes right back to me as an individual. How's that the mission? If there is a mission, we have to accept the fact, look, even the Quran says about those who don't make the hijrah to Medina, we can't do anything for you. All right? Because the mission is here. When the Prophet agreed to Hudaybiyah, they said anybody who left Mecca to come to go to Medina with you, you got to send them back. All right? Right? Anybody who leaves Mecca, the Medina to come to you, go back to Mecca, no, they don't have to send them back. All right? Suhail ibn Amr's son, the Prophet had to send him back. Had to send him back. The mission is bigger than that. And if we have a mission, that's part of having a mission. There are going to be sacrifices that are going to be made. I hope Allah don't call on me to make it. But if He does, I hope that He will allow me to live up to it. There's no mission without sacrifice. And this, we start off with a position that everybody has some right to be happy and everything else. We don't. We don't. And this is not going to be easy. And I'm not claiming that it is. I'm saying that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam came with a message from Allah, and he had to witness people die for that message in numbers. We as an ummah inherited that message from him. And our mission is to preserve and to carry that message. Now, what preserves that? And let me just say something in more concrete terms. Probably get in some trouble for it. And I say this not because I'm a Black American, but because the Black American community is the Black American community and the history of that community in this country. I happen to think that the future of Islam in America is very much dependent on the future of Islam in the Black community. That's what I happen to think. Now, there may be those who disagree with me, and that's fine, all right? But I'm not saying that because I'm Black. I'm saying that because I think that the indigenization in Islam in this country will come first through that community before any other. And that, to me, serves the mission. All right? Because the same thing that happened in the Black community has to happen in other communities. And what happened in the Black community? The contradiction between being Black and being Muslim was destroyed. Just like it was for the Meccans once they did Hudaybiyah, essentially. All right? So how are we going to reproduce that in other communities in America? All right? Without one model of it. So that's a perspective. I am willing to have that perspective critiqued, disagreed with, rejected on the basis of a discussion about the mission. And so it's not going to always be easy. It's not always going to be clear. And I got to accept the fact you don't believe that the Black community is the future to the community, to the future of the community. It's not that you're racist. It's not that you're insensitive. You just don't see it that way. Maybe I can convince you, maybe I cannot. But I hope that in our exchange, all right, our mutual recognition of the mission, all right, will domesticate your criticism of me as it would domesticate my criticism of you. With what?
The idea is like, someone's got to make a hard call at the end of the day. Some folks can get left behind. Decisions get made. That's how life works. Okay, fine. But like, maybe I'm hung up on this point a little bit too much. But like, the idea that, I'm cool. I got a lot of voice. But the idea that like, when we show up, because now I'm talking about the means, right? Like how we get this done. Okay, some people are gonna get left behind. Might be the people making decisions, the people who are most influenced, money, this, that, the third. That's life. Okay. But in terms of me, it's like I hope you can see what I mean by like how do we approach this conversation in a way that we cannot approach the conversation like we're at work.
Oh no! I mean, if no. Let me just clarify something. And I want to agree with you. If you're saying that, I mean, I'm the one who talked about the hell that the heck that this ummah has been through. No. The heck that this ummah has been through over the last 200 years or so. I said that. All right. So the fact that certain issues will be much more emotionally charged than others, I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that. But a sense of mission even has to domesticate that.
Oh, that's tough.
Of course it's tough. And see, that's the problem. We think we're going to get there without nothing being tough. We don't do that at work. We have college degrees in here. That wasn't tough. The bar exam wasn't tough. What is this? And by the way, I mean, easier said than done. I'm just as human as you. I'm just as attached to my, to all my stuff as you are. All right? All right? But as an ideal, as an aspiration. Okay? I mean, if I'm just out for me, trust me, I can rationalize myself into a whole lot of stuff on a daily basis that will keep me right where I am right now. If we have a mission, that's why when we read this book, it takes us out of our comfort zone. Because he's talking about it again. And the Quran is talking about it again. What do you think the Prophet's whole life, what do you think that was all about? What do we think that was all about?